government confiscation of private property and how that government will do anything. It's always been that way. That there's nothing new about this, and so it's just couched in different terms. When you read it in the Bible, you don't recognize this as a contemporary issue. But let's begin with verse number 1, 1 Kings chapter 21 is where we are. And it came to pass after these things that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard which was in Jezreel, hard by the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. All right, now you know where Samaria is. You've got Galilee up north, Samaria is in the middle, and Judea is in the south. So there were basically three, it was like states or counties, however you'd want to refer to them. But Samaria was the part where the Assyrians, when they took Judah in 722 BC, and they brought in captives from other areas of the Mediterranean basin, and the Jews intermingled with these people and had children with them, and they were called the Samaritans. And the Jews spit fire every time they saw a Samaritan. They hated these people. And so that's where this king Ahab is. So there's a guy, private landowner, lives right next door to the king. Ahab spake unto Naboth, saying, Give me thy vineyard, that I may have it for a garden of herbs, because it's near unto my house. That makes sense. I will give thee for it a better vineyard than it, or if it seem good to thee, I will give thee the worth of it in money. All right, now so far, are we legitimate? We're legit. We're looking at a land swap or an outright sale of the property. So far, I have no problem with Ahab. And Naboth said to Ahab, The Lord forbid it me, that I should give the inheritance of my fathers unto thee. And Ahab came into his house heavy and displeased. I want you to notice the very mature response that Ahab displays of the rejection of his deal. Because the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he had said, I will not give thee the inheritance of my fathers. Now he's talking to his wife Jezebel. And he laid him down upon his bed and turned away his face and would eat no bread. What do we call that today? Absolutely throwing a fit. This is a temper tantrum. He stomps into his room with his lip pooched out, throws himself on the bed, throws his head to the wall. Dinner time, I ain't eating anything. Well, Jezebel, his wife. By the way, you know what the name Jezebel means? Will not cohabitate. She would not live with her husband as a wife. She would live with him as his boss and his dictator, but not his wife. And so she says in verse number 4, But Jezebel his wife came to him and said unto him, Why is thy spirit so sad, thou hast eaten no bread? And he said unto her, Because I spake unto Naboth the Jezreelite, and said unto him, Give me thy vineyard for money, or else if it please thee, I will give thee another vineyard for it. And he answered, I will not give thee my vineyard. I won't do that. And Jezebel his wife said unto him, and here we go, Dost thou now govern the kingdom? Who is king around here? Who is the boss? What are you up here doing stuck with your head to the wall? Who's the boss here? Arise and eat bread, and let thy heart be merry. I will give thee the vineyard of Naboth. I'll take care of it, baby. Don't you worry about it. And she did. She starts a rumor about this guy. He gets killed. Ahab has the vineyard. Now, in human history, ideas are kind of like zombies who come back to life after you think they're dead. You know, you buried them, put the wooden stake in their heart, and all this kind of stuff. And normally they're more dangerous the second time they come back because they now have the momentum of history behind them. And people start thinking, well, you know, why it didn't work is because we made this mistake back then, but we've cleaned that up. We're not going to make that mistake again. And so it comes back with a vengeance. And such is the case with Marxism. I don't know if they even study this stuff in school today. But when I was in high school, you had to have Americanism versus communism. And it was a class showing you the differences. And anyway, we don't do that anymore. we're afraid to offend anybody. Whatever you think, whatever you say is perfectly all right with us. And anyway, property is rooted in the grand story of the Bible. And we're going to walk through some verses. I'm going to take time to show you these verses tonight because we need to understand that God created the earth for private ownership. Now, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. We know that. But He has given man the freedom and the liberty to legitimately own property and use that property for his personal use, benefit, and income. There's nothing unbiblical about that at all. As a matter of fact, look in Genesis chapter 1. We'll look at the beginning of this thing. Genesis 1, look at verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion. That means rulership. Have rulership over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Question, do animals have moral equity with men? No. Now, just because of that, does that mean that we can abuse them? No. That is a horrific thing to do. But they are to be used for our, well, do animals ever bring you in? Do you have any pets? You love your pets? You take care of them, get them in the cold, you bring them inside, you feed them, you do all this kind of, well, sure, absolutely. Do you eat animals? You eat dead stuff? I do. I eat dead stuff all the time. And in order for it to be dead, it has to be killed, okay? A lot of people have a problem with that. Now, verse number 29, God said, Behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree, yielding seed to you, it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, to every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat also. And God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good, and the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Now, God gave us property rights. How many of you own a piece of property? All right, we got property owners in here. It's your property. You worked, you paid for it. It's either yours or yours in the bank's at this point right now, but the ultimate goal is for you to have the title in your hand so that that property belongs to you. So look in the book of Deuteronomy now, chapter 5, and we're going to read verse 21. Deuteronomy 5, verse 21. I was talking to some people this past week, and there's a principle of Bible interpretation. You don't just open the Bible and say, oh, that means that. There are some rules of Bible interpretation. And one of the rules is called the rule of first mention, okay? And the rule of first mention is simply this. The first time something is mentioned in the Bible, that is the prototype for that particular event. For instance, when is the first time the family is mentioned in the male-female relationship? When's the first time that's mentioned? In the book of Genesis. So that is the prototype for every other proper, appropriate relationship between a man and a woman, and it is in marriage, okay? So that's the rule of first mention. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, look at verse 21. There are some rules. There were 613 laws in the law of Moses. And so here's one of them. Neither shalt thou desire thy neighbor's wife, neither shalt thou covet thy neighbor's house, that's his property, his field, that's his land, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Now here's the principle. Why can't you covet and desire and take away these things that belong to your neighbor? Because they're your neighbor's property. So if there is no such thing as property rights, have at it. Right? If there's no such thing as legal property rights. Now look at Exodus chapter 20. Go back to Exodus chapter 20, look at verse 15. thou shalt not steal. All right, now, in order to steal something, what is absolutely necessary? You got to want it, first of all. It belongs to somebody else. And so if there's no such thing as private property ownership, there is no such thing as stealing. But since something is exclusively mine or yours, when I take it without your permission, that is stealing. Now, whether that is your car, your house, your money, whatever it is. All right, look at Job chapter 24. Way over the book of Job. We're going to study that book one day. I think we can cover it in about 4 weeks. Yeah. All right, look at Job 24, verse number 2. Some remove the landmarks. They violently take away flocks and feed thereof. No, so now they didn't have fences. We got barbed wire fences and all that kind of stuff today, but they did have corner markers. They had either a stone, which was the thing it wouldn't wear away with time very easily. And so they would take a stone, and they would set up a stone on the northeast corner of their property. And they'd put one on the northwest corner of their property, and then the southwest corner, and then in the northwest corner. And pretty soon, you have a fence made out of stone. Now, if I live next door to you, and I need a few extra acres because I've had a good bumper crop of cows this year, and I need that water that down by the river, and I need that piece of property. All I've got to do is move your rocks, and I've just stolen your property. God, absolutely, that was an abomination to God to do that, to move your property lines. All right, look at Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus 19, verse 13. Thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. All right, so you are not to rob people of what belongs to them. Okay? I am of the opinion that I am for paying taxes. Because when my house is on fire, I want the fire department to come. Those guys have to have money so they can take care of their family. I understand that. Somebody breaks into my house, I want the police there. Not in 2 hours. I want them because they've got to get paid. I understand that. But there is this confiscatory tax policy that puts the burden of all of these public services on people who make more money than anybody else. I am for a flat tax, personally. Instead of, well, if you make X amount of dollars, you're, 38% is your, and then those that don't make anything, they're not going to pay anything. But if their house is on fire, guess who shows up? They've got to show up. And so I'm for a flat tax. And that flat tax is everybody pays, say, 7%. Everybody. Just like a sales tax that's turned into this income. Anyway, we're kind of off pace here. But look at 1 Corinthians. Now let's go to the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians 9. We're going to begin reading with verse number 9. For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Sure he does. Or saith he it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope. So in other words, I'm going to plant my crops because I'm going to eat those crops. I'm going to sell those crops. And so I've got the hope of taking care of my family. Now, can anybody come in and steal that hope from me legitimately? No. I don't care if it's the government or your neighbor or the king of Samaria. They don't have the right to do that. And he that thresheth in hope shall be partaker of his hope. if we have sown unto you spiritual things, it is a great thing. Is it a great thing that we reap of your carnal things? Now he gets into this matter of them take care of their pastor. But as Westerners, we benefit from approximately 6,000 years of laws and customs and traditions and thinking about the concept of property. And Christians have always been the tip of the spear when it comes to protecting and defending private property. We have just been famous for that. And so drawing on our ideas of, based on biblical theology, the Western world, I'm talking about the Western Hemisphere, which we're a part of, slowly developed this highly sophisticated system of property law and property titling without intention, actually, but it developed into this rather complicated system of property rights for owners. So that now, are there property rights laws, Brenda? Pretty hefty, I'm sure, you know. So we have developed that. Those things that we have as far as written laws are concerned are not contained in the Bible, but the seed of property rights is in the Bible, and we have just developed this necessary, actually, form of government. And so in 1 Kings 21, Ahab, who was the government, he was the king, he was the man, confiscated the property of a private landowner. Now, not only did he confiscate it, he murdered the landowner and then took possession of that property. And don't think that's the only time that's ever happened in history. And by the way, God brought judgment on Ahab for that. Now, it took 20 years. It took 20 years. The prophet told him, he said, the dog's going to lick your blood in the same place that they licked the blood of your witch of a wife. And so I can imagine for 20 years, every time Ahab heard a dog bark, he jumped across the breakfast table, you know, thinking, you know, it's just a day, but it eventually happened. Now, a lot of people scoff at the return of communism and Marxism. And we think, oh my goodness, no, that's a dead thing. That's like slavery, and we're never going to have anything to do with that anymore. And we just can't take this seriously. Well, I'm going to give you some statistics that I want you to take seriously, because in the 20th century, over 100 million people have been murdered under this system. I'm talking about the destruction of entire countries. I'm talking about wiping out entire populations. So for what purpose? Confiscation of property and buildings and businesses. All right, keep that right there. Thank you, Anna. You know, when you think about communism, those of you who are old enough, and most everybody in here just about is, when I think of communism, I envision, you know, hippies wearing Che Guevara T-shirts, if y'all remember Che Guevara. And, you know, just, well, this is a movement we can laugh at, right? No. Did you understand that we have elected officials in the Senate and in the House of Representatives that are for what we're talking about tonight? And there are those that this has been the desire for a long time. They just are aware we can't talk about this stuff out in the public, because America wouldn't put up with this. Well, now there's such a paradigm shift in the country that now they can talk about this stuff openly. And there's a pretty good swath of people in the country who are for that. Ages 16 to 35 is the greatest age group in the country that are for socialism. Now, what is exactly Marxism? Well, Marxism is an atheistic, materialistic worldview. And when I say materialistic, I'm not talking about, people want a whole lot of money and furs. That's what I'm talking about. A materialistic worldview is that there is nothing but the physical universe. There's just dirt and air and trees. There's nothing else. There's no God. There's no, supernatural. There's none of that. And it is based on the ideas of this guy right here, Karl Marx. And he promoted the abolition of private property, This is the heartbeat of Marxism. Now, most of the country is privately owned. Millions and millions of people own houses, one or more. They own acreage. They own groves. They own ranches. They own millions of acres. Now, could you imagine what it would take for there to be a transfer of ownership from private to public in this country? Can you imagine how much blood would run in the streets over this issue? And but Marxism is this atheistic, materialistic worldview based on this guy's ideas that promotes public ownership of the means of production. That's called socialism. Public ownership of all business and all economic activity to build this utopian communistic situation. So now, what is exactly communism? Communism is the ideal of a classless, stateless, utopian society in which everybody owns exactly the same thing. We're all co-owners of your piece of property, of your house, of your business. Everybody owns everything. It's commonly owned, and every person is paid according to their ability and according to their needs. So let's say here's a 75-year-old man that owns 5,000 acres of property. He can't get out and work it anymore, but it's his. So the government decides, you're not very productive here. I don't care if your grandfather owned this property, and so we're going to move you. And so they pack this gentleman and his wife up and then move him to a 5-acre piece of property in another state, and the state comes in and confiscates his thousands of acres to produce crops for the commune. That's what we're looking at. That's what communism does. And which brings us to what is socialism. Well, socialism is an economic system that is based upon the government or communal ownership of the means of production and distribution of services and goods. It'd be like the state of Florida, or in the case of this would be the federal government, would own Keith Davis's fertilizer plant. Keith no longer owns it. He no longer has final authority over anything the government does. The government will tell him what kind of fertilizer he can sell, what he can purchase, who he can hire, how many he can hire, what he has to pay them. And so that brings us to capitalism. What is capitalism? Capitalism is an economic system in which capital assets are privately held, privately owned, and the prices, the production, and the distribution of goods and services are determined by competition within a free market. Do you know why drug companies can charge $1,000 for a bottle of pills? Because they can. Exactly. They can do that. Now, can capitalism be abused? It can. But now here's the thing. If a guy is selling say widget A, good widget, and you need a widget, and so he's got one for $59.95. A mile down the road, we got another guy selling the same exact widget for $19. What widget would you buy? Well, we would all probably buy the $59 widget. Now, what will happen to the... Do what? Yeah, the $19 widget. What would happen to the guy selling his for $59.95? He's going to go out of business. Should he? Yes. Or should the government come in? You know what I'm saying? Let the fool go out of business. See, competition levels the playing ground. Now, if you are forced to do business with the $59.95 widget dealer by government decree, see, that's wrong. You are free, in a free market society, you are free to do business. We can leave town to buy stuff. And the big cry here in the local area is local business, and I'm for that. But don't take advantage of that. All right? You got Widget A for $60 at a local store, and you can drive 20 miles to Avon Park and get it for $19. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to drive 20 miles to Avon Park and buy it for $19. And so it's just like we got a deal going on down here, this new Circle K. They got this huge Circle K built down there. And there's a, what is that, just right, Marathon right across the street? Really not, haven't been in there yet. And I thought, well, they're going to come in a nickel cheaper on gas than the poor little old Marathon across the street. They're actually 4 cents higher for whatever reason. I think it's a terrible marketing move to do that. But anyway, Karl Marx defined socialism as, quote, this guy said this, quote, the abolition of private property, end quote. That's Marxism in a nutshell. And so Marx believed that privately held property was the basis of all unfairness and all corruption in a society. It's when you get a piece of property and you build a business on that property and you make more money than anybody else. That's wrong. That just should not be according to Karl Marx. Now, look in Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22:28. You're going to hear this a number of times in Proverbs. Remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set. Now look at verse 29. Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean, and the word mean means average. You're not going to stand before average men. This guy has gone way beyond the norm. He has built a business. He has done, well, the king is going to want to draw him in to get some ideas. At least that's the way it used to be. Or look at Proverbs 23 and verse number 10. Remove not the ancient landmark. Even more than that, enter not into the fields of the fatherless. Don't encroach on their property. Private property is defended in the Bible, Old and New Testaments. So Marx did most of his work in the British Museum in London. That's kind of where he had to flee, because there were several countries that were destroyed by the ideas of Karl Marx, and they chased him out of the country. And so he finally wound up in the British Museum. And there was a lot to despise about Karl Marx. Number one, he was famously rude. A very rude man. He refused to bathe, and he refused to get a haircut. Where's her picture of Carl? This is kind of what he was famous for. And he neglected his wife. He neglected his children. Had several children, and he wasn't a father to them. But, yeah. I understand that. Now, this guy claimed to be the hero of the working class that he famously named the proletariat. All right? We would be the proletariat, and we're just the average working class. However, this man never stepped into a factory his whole life. This man did not work, but he was the hero of the working class. On February the 21st, 1848, Marx published a work that we know today as the Communist Manifesto. And with the assistance of one of his young revolutionary friends by the name of Frederick Engels. Y'all ever heard of Frederick Engels? You probably have. He subsidized Marx's rather large, voracious financial appetites. This guy had high financial needs in his life. Spent a lot of money. And but where was that money earned? Well, it was earned from Frederick Engels' father's factory. So Marx got his money from a factory that was relatively successful, and he was the one that just recited the evils of factory owners in London. That these guys were just horrible, even though this is how his lifestyle was sustained. And the communists manifesto. I'm going to read you one of the defining paragraphs of the Communist Manifesto, and I'm telling you, when we look at this, which was published in 1848, and what is happening with some of the mouths and some of the suits in Washington coming out and saying, this is what we are, Bernie Sanders being one. He hides nothing. Nothing. Now, I want you to understand that there are people in the country that have believed this for decades. This is where they have wanted us. They just knew better than to say it out loud. Sanders is saying it out loud. And he has kind of opened the door for a lot of other people to say the same thing. But here is one of the defining paragraphs in the Communist Manifesto written in 1848. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. We're not going to hide it. We're just going to tell you outright. They openly declare their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians, working class, have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Proletarians of all countries unite. End quote. Now, this has been taken literally throughout the course of the last 150 years. Marx's disciples have marched across the pages of history for a century and a half doing exactly this. Now, if you want to look at the quality of a program, look at one of its graduates. Look at the ultimate, you want to know what a painter, what kind of a painter a guy is? How could you find out? Go look at a house or a building he painted. Go look at the ultimate end result. You want to know what socialism and Marxism and communism looks like? I invite you to fly to Cuba. I invite you to go to Venezuela or any other country that has adopted China. There are 5 communist countries active in the world, and I'll give you their names here in just a moment. But for a century and a half, they have stomped across history, and they have left a trail of blood. This is a bloodthirsty, we will do whatever we have to do to get your property, because we know you're not going to give it up voluntarily, but we're going to get it from you anyway. And so when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 under the leadership of I think one of the greatest presidents we've ever had, and that's Ronald Reagan, a lot of us thought that communism was done. Well, in quick succession, the Soviet Union and its satellites just bit the hand, the Marxist hand that claimed to feed them. And now Russia is making a comeback. Don't think communism is dead, folks. Ezekiel 38 lets us know that the king of the north, who is Russia, is the big bear, is going to come down and going to do some damage in the land of Israel. But there are still some nations today that think this is the best form of government. And there's China, Cuba, North Korea among, and by the way, you know who just had a summit last week? Yeah, Putin and that little hairball from North Korea. Very few people and I say that in love, very few people in Western civilization have come to actual terms with what has happened in history through the filter of communism. And everybody knows about the horrors of Germany. That's on the front burner of everybody's horrific page in their mind. Nazi Germany killed over 6 million Jews. They were murdered in these prison camps. And it wasn't just Jews, by the way. They killed a lot of Gentiles, gypsies, people that had mental disorders and physical disorders were just exterminated. However, and that was a horrible thing, terrible thing, over 100 million people have been exterminated by communist regimes in the 20th century. 20th century. Now, historians have estimated, I'm going to give you some estimates of the figures that historians say these are the numbers of people that were killed under communist regimes. 20 to 60 million in the Soviet Union. 40 to 70 million in China. 2 million in Cambodia. That was under the Khmer Rouge regime back in the day. 1.6 million in North Korea. 1.2 million in Yugoslavia. In 1971, China instituted a one-child policy, which that's been done away with, understand? Somebody told me it had. But anyway, under that regime, there were 336 million abortions. 336 million. Communism in the 20th century has killed twice the combined dead from World War I and II. Now, this is what happens when every man does that which is right in his own eyes. You have a nice piece of property. I want to buy your property. No, I don't want to do that. Well, bet you I can get it. And so there are systems in the world, not here in the United States as of yet, but you just kill the guy. Now, if you have government authority, it's not against the law. It wasn't against the law. Now, it was against God's law, yes. But who was going to stand up to Ahab and say, well, you can't do that? Nobody. He was the king, backed up by his will not cohabitate with my husband, wife by the name of Jezebel. Now, it's too late for us to stand up for these 100 million families and people that have been murdered. But the motivation behind these atrocities was leaders reconciled themselves to evil because they believed it served the ultimate good. You know why Hitler led the deaths of 6 million Jews? He thought he was purifying society. See, they looked at Jews as subhumans. Now, if we keep letting these mongrels breed with German shepherds, we're going to ruin the German shepherd line, and we're going to have Muttweilers. Well, nobody wanted Muttweilers because we were Germans. We're the pure race. We're the Aryans. And no, we don't want that come. Well, the best thing to do, the ultimate solution then, let's get rid of them. And so they did. They got rid of 6 million of them anyway. And the British statesman Edmund Burke said, and I love Edmund Burke, quote, when bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fail one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. So here's what happens. Normally, people with these radical ideas like this come together as a monolithic group. People that oppose them don't, because we just always assume that right is going to win, but it doesn't need a leader. Nobody needs to organize it. Nobody needs to say anything. It will just automatically happen. That did not happen in the case of Naboth and Ahab. It did not happen in the case of these 100 million people that have been murdered by these regimes. Somebody must say something. All right, now, we live in a very small county. Very few people, 25,000 people in this county. I would just encourage you, in your conversations with people, stand up for biblical truth, and to parse that even further, there may be people in this county that are for this confiscation of property. Now, let me tell you what Elizabeth Warren, who is a Democratic candidate for president, let me tell you her genius idea. Now, think about this, and at the outset, it sounds, well, that's reasonable. She is proposing a 2% wealth tax on people, families, that have a net worth of $50 million or more. 2%, that's not very much, is it? 2% of $50 million? You mean to tell me you're willing to let people die in the streets from hunger and not have a place to house their, because you are so, well, let me explain what she's doing. This is under the covers. You got $50 million. What the tax would do is tax the gain on that $50 million in a year. The average income off of $50 million is 5%. All she wants is nearly half of it. We're looking at a 40% tax on property gains of people, but now the general population, 2%, I think that's reasonable. I think you ought to do that. And what I'm telling you is this. People that are wealthy in this country now are looked at as animals by this group. Look how rich these people are. You know how they got rich? They got it by stealing it from you, poor people. And I've never understood that. I'm like, wait, what? How did they do that? You know how most of the people, the millionaires in this country, you know how most of the people that are millionaires made their millions? Hard work. That's exactly right. I think it's like 2 or 3% inherited it. Most people started with nothing and have built. Now, is there anything wrong with that? Absolutely not. Now, if you're a cutthroat and you steal and lie, and Henry Flagler was one of those, founder of Flagler College. That guy, he was a cutthroat. Now, I could tell you some stories about Flagler we don't have time to get into right now, but I have no problem with a college being named after you or you being a multi-gazillionaire as long as you do not interfere with my right to do the same thing. And I may not be as successful as you are, but anyway, there are 5 communist countries in existence today. They are China, Vietnam, North Vietnam, Laos, North Korea, and Cuba. And if you go to any one of these countries and look at their infrastructure, I have been through Central America. I have been on the Pan American Highway. The Pan American Highway would set you on fire at a county commission meeting if there was a road like that in Hardy County. And we just about have one, but it's not. Y'all been on the Pan American Highway. And you got to dodge the potholes. When I said, man, what's the matter with this road? And I think it was Carlos Angula said, oh, this is the Pan American Highway. I'm like, what? I mean, the potholes it's ridiculous. Anyway, you cannot get medical care. Housing is absolutely not restricted, but it's ridiculous what these people are having to live in. Anyway, the Communist Manifesto, and I'm going to give you these. I'm going to list these for you. There are 10 ideas that serve as sort of a series of steps. This won't all happen at once, and Karl Marx knew it because people were attached to their property. And they're not going to just say, oh, yeah, sure, we'll give that up. But so in incremental steps, this is what Karl Marx said had to happen. And these things are inevitable. One of the things that Marx did, he was passionate about this has got to be the way the world works. That's the only way that everything will be fair and everybody will have what they need. Number 1, abolition of private property in land and application of all rents of land to public uses. So if you have a piece of property, let's say you own a house and you're renting that house to somebody, you don't get the rent money. That's turned over to public funds and it's distributed as needed. All right, number 2, so abolition of private property. That's a big deal. Number 2, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. Communist Manifesto. The more you make, the more you're going to have to pay. All right? Number 3, abolition of all rights of inheritance. If your daddy owns $100,000, you don't get that. It's going to be confiscated and used for public use. Number 4, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Number 5, centralization of credit in the banks of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Now, Sarah works for a privately owned bank, and I think it's probably one of the more successful banks, maybe in the country, but I know in the state of Florida. A shrewd businessman started that, who turned it over to another shrewd businessman, who in recent months has turned it over to another grandson who's a pretty shrewd businessman as well. But could you imagine a state bank that was where all money is deposited and you just receive a stipend from the government, all right, regardless of how much you've earned. Number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. All telephone companies owned by the government. The internet owned by the government. Everything as far as being able to communicate and transport. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. Bringing wastelands into cultivation and improving the soil generally in accordance with a common plan, and that's called, the new term for that is sustainable development. Now you look up Agenda 21. I've got a copy of this whole thing at the house. Agenda 21 is a plan to create a sustainable environment. Pretty frightening stuff, and so this is just one of the steps. Number 8, equal obligation of all to work. Well, I already see a problem there. We got folks in the country that don't want to work. For the first time in U.S. history, a few years ago, you can stay home and make as much money as you can with a minimum wage job with all the benefits that are available. Now, let me ask you a question. You got some, and not everybody that receives benefits, I'm sure, and I know is not this, but you got people that could work. They're able-bodied. They're capable of work. Why would they? What's the motivation for them to work when they can stay home and watch TV all day and just get their check in the mail every month? Why wouldn't an illegal immigrant come across the boundary of the United States and get put on the payroll of the United States government? Why wouldn't you do that? What is the motivation for you to actually work and to produce the same amount of money? Number 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all distinctions between town and country through a more equitable distribution of populace over the country. Did you get that? John, we really think that you and your wife would do better in Idaho. So we're going to move you. So you don't own the house you live in anyway. You don't own the property. We'll put somebody in there that fits. And so the government becomes God and master in this system. And that's exactly what Bernie Sanders wants to do. That's exactly. Now, it's got different faces, but you understand that Sharia law basically is the same thing. Now, Dearborn, Michigan is a no-go zone. Minneapolis is getting to be about the same thing. Yeah. President Obama opened up 80,000 Muslims were allowed to migrate into the Minnesota area. Well, guess who they elected to Congress? They elected a Muslim to Congress. I'm just telling you, these are incremental, might raise an eyebrow, might not. This is not all going to happen in one day. But then number 10, free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor, which would be for that, in its present forms. Combination of education with industrial production. Are you hearing this from candidates? We need to delete the debt of these students. And we need to provide free education. Whoa now. Free to whom? Is there any such thing as a free lunch? You understand that college professors are going to be paid. Buildings have to be built and insured and maintained. Free? Really? So if you contract for a debt, should the government come and forcibly cancel your debt? Now, who's going to be for that? Who's going to be for free college education? The people that are going to college. So who's going to college? It's this group that I told you about. Well, yeah, I want a free college education. Who doesn't, want that kind of a thing? And so now, let's say this, let me just play the devil's advocate for a moment. Let's say this goes into effect tomorrow. All student debt is canceled. Well, here's a guy that Friday just paid off his college loans. What about me? Am I going to be repaid? Now, Marxists are convinced that this is not only the best system, but it is inevitable that we do away with all classes. Now, by classes, I'm talking about Upper, middle, lower class. This has just sort of been the layer of Western culture since the beginning. And they want this to develop into what they refer to a higher state of centralized planning. Well, this system has been in existence for over 2,000 years. The founding of the United States was a bold, innovative strike at the jugular vein of this monstrous system of murder and crime. The United States, when it was founded, did not do anything new. Now, what was not new was the way England was running its government. They had a king who was a dictator. There was nothing new about that. Now, the United States comes along and says, we're not going to do that. We don't want a king. George Washington was offered the crown, by the way, and he refused it. He said, no, we're trying to get away from that. Now, the United States did not want to develop a new kind of government. What the United States did in the drafting of the Constitution, we returned to the original form of government that God had established, which was the people are in charge. We just returned. If you want to say that something was new, this matter of dictator, that was an aberration. And so we have, in men's governments, it's kind of like a triangle. Let me give you an illustration here. I hope I know how to make a triangle. That's close enough. All right, let's say this is a pyramid. All right, now, in men's governments, don't anybody laugh. Well, I'm going to fix it where y'all won't laugh. Let me fold, make one more fold. All right. Well, okay, one more. All right, here we go. All right, now, in men's government is like this. You got a guy at the top, or a group of people at the top. Who's at the bottom? The population. All right? This is communism, socialism, fascism. This is all the isms of government that the world has ever known. You've got people at the top, and this is exactly this is what's happened. And guess who got the money that the United States sent to Cuba? Who got that money? Apparently, these people did not, because they still live like it's the 14th century. Now, let me tell you how God just turns things upside down. Now, in the Bible, who had the authority? People were in charge. Guess who had less authority than anybody? You know, God put the leadership within the hands of the people. Now, this is how the United States was founded, right here. We have a representative government. We do not have a democracy. Now, the difference between a democracy and a republic is really simple. In a democracy, everybody has the same vote for the laws, for instance. Now, if we were the whole country, we could have a democracy here, because everybody's here and you could all vote. But people started moving. They started moving out west. They started moving down south. They spreading all over the country. So it became impossible for a democracy to live here. And so the founders, who had been reading Polybius and Cicero and John Locke and all these geniuses of the past, they said, well, look, why don't let's devise a constitutional republic. And the word republic just simply means representative. And so now, do we have a representative in Washington? Florida, we've got 2 senators. Now, whether you like them or not, it's got nothing to do with it. They represent us, or supposed to. Now, if we didn't have that, then everybody in Florida would have to go to Washington every time they took a vote. And that's obviously impossible. And so we devised this wonderful system of a constitutional republic. So we're not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. And there's a new term, and put your ear to the ground, there's a new term that liberals are using to try to sell this and make it a little more palatable, and it's called state capitalism. Have you heard the term? State capitalism. All state capitalism is, it's the practice of the federal government's taking ownership and management control of private business. It is the same old stink sprayed with the deodorant of new terminology. It's the same old crippled hag dressed up in contemporary gown of central planning terminology. It's the same thing. And so in our country here, we're blessed to have a system. Has it been perverted? Oh, my word, yes. Who's done it? Everybody. Everybody. Have Republicans done it? Yes. Have Democrats done it? Yes. Everybody that has ever had a hand in Washington or Tallahassee or wherever men collect for authoritative power and political power, there is corruption. There always has been and there always will be. And so to dilute that as much as possible, our framers came up with these ideas that they had read in history. And these things had been in existence for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But did you know that in 1787, when we had the Constitutional Convention, you know how many nations were incorporating these principles into their governing structure? There was none. We saw these things and said, wow, let's do that. And so boom, bada boom, bada boom. And a gentleman by the name of Adam Smith, genius of an economist, published a set of books called The Wealth of Nations. It was a 3-volume set of books, and it was basically what we've built our system of economy on. And guess what year they were published? 1787. Just in time for our founders to read and say, I like that. And so we adopted, and this guy was an Englishman, by the way, we adopted the principles of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, and that's why, and the kings of Europe sat on their thrones. Ladies and gentlemen, they laughed at us. You guys got to be kidding me. You're going to put chicken farmers in charge of your government? You're going to put butchers and bakers and candlestick makers? You're going, really? Oh, my word. Don't you know this is the divine right of kings to tell you people what to do? You bunch of plebeians? We're the ones. Anyway, they laughed at us initially. But by 1905, they stopped laughing. Because we became the richest industrial nation on the face of the earth. The envy of every nation in the world. And that's why people have risked their lives to come here. I don't hear many people drowning in rubber inner tubes trying to get to Cuba. But I've heard of a bunch drowning, trying to get from Cuba to here. Now why? It's not because that our rivers are any cleaner or our mountains are any higher. It's because we have more freedom. That's what makes America exceptional. It's not us genetically, because most of us are migrants or came from migrant families. My dad came from Ireland, and my mom's family came from Italy. That's why I look so Italian with the dark skin and everything. And so we're all immigrants. So are immigrants welcome here? Well, my word, yes. Might I encourage you, just come through the door. You know, quit trying to sneak in here illegally. There's nothing right about that, and we don't have time to get into anything like that. But I want you to know we're not through facing some really life-changing battles here in the United States. And one of those battles, unfortunately, is the resurrection of this zombie idea of Marxism. And Marx has become the hero of a lot of people in the country. But if you just, oh my word, just find a successful example. I'm begging you, find me one successful example of Marxism in a country, anywhere. Huh? There is not one. You're exactly right. Wherever this stuff is touched, it has left death. Now, would someone please explain to me the attraction of that? It's like going to a restaurant, and the waiter say, oh, by the way, everybody that's ordered this meal has died within 20 minutes. Oh, I'll have 2 of those. Yeah. You know what the result. There is no. It might not be good. There is no. It is going to create death and destruction. And so we're Americans. First of all, we're Christians. We're Christians. We're Americans, and I am so thankful for the fact that I was born here. You know, we're Americans by birth. Everybody in here is, as far as I know. And we're blessed and we don't know it. I'm just telling you, God has blessed us and we don't know because we have never lived anywhere else. Now, we've been some other places, and there's a reason why this is the place in the world. It's the last corner of freedom, folks. It is. And so, you know, run for local office. You know, run for city commission, county commission. Speak up when you're in restaurants and people start talking about this stuff and bragging on Bernie Sanders. I'm not going to let that go away. Somebody starts that, I'm going to say, excuse me, whoa. And so there needs to be some pushback. All right? Needs to be some pushback. Thank you for being here. Shirley, God bless you. Thank you for coming. Glad you're doing so much better. Oh, my word. Have a good week. Lord willing, we'll see you Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And I hope you have a good week, okay? Let's bow for prayer. Lord, thank you so much for the freedom, not only in Christ, but in the country. We don't want to lose this. And I know what Scripture, I know what Revelation says that we will. Ultimately, all nations are going to be dissolved as far as sovereign borders are concerned and constitutions. I'm aware of that. My prayer is that we would be faithful regardless of what goes on in Washington or Tallahassee. We don't need freedom to be faithful. That's very convenient, but it's not required. And as long as we're free as a nation, I pray, Lord, that we would speak the truth to as many people as we possibly can. Bless those who are here tonight. Thank you for their presence. Thank you for their friendship. Thank you for their commitment to the truth. And we don't want to start trouble. Lord, we won't back down from it either if it's forced on us. And may we obey you first and just be living translations of the truths of your word in our culture. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Thank you for being here.